"Step away from the vehicle," she shouted, holding up her phone like it was a badge. I blinked, halfway through drinking my morning coffee on my own porch. The vehicle in question? My truck. Parked in my driveway. On my own land. The woman yelling? Karen Halberton, president, self-declared enforcer, and unrelenting tyrant of our HOA. What she didn't know, of course, was that I'm the county sheriff. And when the cops showed up, they didn't ask me to move my truck. They asked for my autograph. The trouble began like most HOA nonsense does, with a piece of paper taped to something that doesn't deserve it. In this case, it was my front windshield. Fluorescent orange. Screaming with capital letters. Apparently, I was being warned for violating the HOA's vehicle visibility standards. The specific complaint said something about oversized, commercial, and military-styled vehicles undermining the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. My pickup truck was a clean, civilian Ford F-250, and not only was it legally parked, it hadn't moved in 2 days because I was on my first proper break-in week. I looked around for cameras. Surely this was a prank. Nope. Just Karen stomping toward me from 3 houses down, her little designer dogs yipping and bouncing in their ridiculous custom HOA logo hoodies. She pointed dramatically at the truck like she'd discovered a stolen tank parked in a kindergarten. I gave her a polite nod and sipped my coffee again. That only made her angrier. "You can't just park your command vehicle out here like this," she declared, waving her clipboard as if that alone could issue tickets. "This is a residential neighborhood, not some police depot." I smiled and gestured to my driveway. That's funny, because I could have sworn this was my house. My truck. My driveway. Karen narrowed her eyes, sensing sarcasm but not having the wit to reply to it. "You're clearly violating HOA regulations," she sniffed. "And don't try to lie your way out of it. We've had multiple complaints." "I'd love to see those complaints," I said, already knowing full well no one else in the neighborhood cared. In fact, most of them loved when I brought the truck home. It made them feel safe, especially after the break-ins on the north side last fall. But Karen didn't care about facts. She cared about control. And the moment she thought she could enforce her petty kingdom on someone new in town, she latched on like a tick. "Well, I'll be escalating this. You can expect a formal citation by the end of the day," she threatened, scribbling something into her notepad with a flair so theatrical I nearly clapped. "I'm shaking," I said with a grin. "Karen, you do what you gotta do." She blinked. You just wait. The authorities will hear about this. You'll regret messing with me." That was the moment I leaned back in my chair and said the line that I would later replay with great satisfaction. "Please, Karen. Call the cops." She did. Oh, she did. That evening, around 6, I was inside prepping dinner when I heard a knock at the door. Through the window, I could already see the patrol cruiser. The second I opened the door, Deputy Jameson grinned at me. "Sheriff," he said, tipping his hat. "Got a real wild call on our hands." "Oh no," I said, playing along. "Should I be worried?" "Well, there's apparently an unidentified man in a suspicious military vehicle intimidating the neighborhood." We both laughed so hard I had to hold the doorframe. Karen was on the sidewalk, watching this all unfold with smug triumph, until she saw us laughing. Her face twisted like a pretzel. Jameson looked over at her and nodded. "Ma'am," he said, walking toward her, "this truck here belongs to Sheriff Connors. You know, the elected head of law enforcement for the entire county." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked from me to the truck to the patrol car, then back to me like someone trying to spot the hidden cameras. "You're joking," she hissed. "No, ma'am," Jameson said, pulling a notepad of his own. "But I am going to need to take a report on false reporting of a public official. That's a Class B misdemeanor." She went pale. "Now, Sheriff," Jameson said, turning back to me, "do you mind signing this?" He held up a laminated newspaper clipping from an award I'd won last year. "My nephew's a huge fan." Karen stared in stunned silence as I signed the clipping right in front of her. It could have ended there. Honestly, it should have. Most people, after realizing they'd messed with the actual sheriff, might back off and pretend it never happened. But not Karen. No, she had a different kind of ego. The kind that doesn't retreat, it regroups. By the next morning, I had 3 new infractions posted to my door. One claimed I had left my garbage bins out for over 10 minutes past collection. Another cited suspicious garage lighting. And the last? Noise complaints due to mechanical activity, because apparently my electric smoker, set on low, gently puffing away, was deemed a disruptive machine. This wasn't just about the truck anymore. It was war. And she had no idea that I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to bring the full force of the law, logic, and petty revenge down on her ridiculous regime. Because if there's one thing more satisfying than being right, it's proving it with a court ruling and a smirk. And trust me, Karen was about to learn the difference between running an HOA and running her mouth. By the end of the week, Karen's absurdity had gone from irritating to outright laughable. She wasn't just doubling down, she was launching a full-on crusade against me, determined to prove that I was somehow beneath the great and mighty authority of her neighborhood rules. Each morning I'd wake up to a new notice of violation, duct-taped to my front door like some passive-aggressive ransom letter. She'd moved beyond the truck, and was now citing me for the most ludicrous infractions imaginable. One slip claimed my backyard barbecue smoke was violating air quality regulations. Another claimed that my fence color didn't match neighborhood palette harmony. I nearly choked on my coffee when I read that one. I hadn't even painted the fence. It was the same weathered cedar it had been since the house was built in the 90s. The notices weren't even official. She printed them herself and signed them with the HOA's name, using a little rubber stamp shaped like an eagle. I recognized the stamp because she had used it on a welcome basket when I first moved in last year, filled with expired coupons and a stern list of community rules. Back then, I'd chalked it up to harmless enthusiasm. Now, I realized she saw the HOA as her personal little kingdom, and every homeowner was her subject. I might have let it slide, just ignored her and kept to myself, but the thing about being a sheriff isn't just about dealing with criminals. It's about dealing with bullies. And Karen, in her pastel jogging suit and oversized sunglasses, was becoming the queen of them. I decided it was time to do a little digging. Not the kind that involved arrest warrants or search teams. Just the good old-fashioned paper trail. I spent a few late nights going through county records, property filings, HOA registration documents, and anything I could find on the governance of our little subdivision. And what I found? It was a legal treasure chest. Turns out, Karen's rulebook wasn't just outdated, it was borderline illegal. Several of the current HOA board members had not been formally elected in over 3 years, violating the association's own charter. Meetings had not been held publicly, as required by law, and there was no documentation proving the validity of the fines being levied. Most importantly, the HOA had not re-registered its nonprofit status with the state, meaning they technically had no authority to collect or enforce anything at all. I chuckled as I read the last document. Karen was running a paper empire. All bark, no teeth. The more I read, the more I realized I wasn't the only one she'd targeted. Notes tucked into the digital archives referenced disputes with other residents, over lawn flamingos, unapproved patio chairs, even a kid's lemonade stand she once shut down for unregulated commerce. This wasn't just a personality flaw. It was a pattern. One afternoon, I stopped by the house of my neighbor, Mr. Delaney, a retired Navy man with a limp and a wicked sense of humor. I'd seen Karen argue with him weeks ago over a flagpole that stood proudly in his front yard. She said it violated height restrictions. He said it honored his fallen friends. When I told him I was gathering info on HOA abuse, he didn't hesitate to join in. Within hours, I had a small but determined alliance of residents willing to speak out about their experiences. Word spread quickly. Mrs. Elkins down the block had apparently been threatened with legal action because her garden gnomes didn't conform to neighborhood standards. Another neighbor, Raj, said Karen cited him for excessive front porch seating, claiming his 3 chairs created visual clutter. These were not jokes. These were actual things she wrote up with the HOA stamp. We all agreed to stay quiet for now, just gather documentation. I wanted to give her enough rope to hang herself, metaphorically, of course, and she was doing an excellent job of it. That same week, Karen delivered her boldest move yet, a formal notice declaring that my property was in violation of community harmony expectations, and that if the matter wasn't resolved within 10 days, the HOA would take action up to and including property lien placement. I laughed out loud in my kitchen when I read it. She had finally crossed a line from annoying to dangerous. You can't just threaten to put a lien on someone's home unless you have real legal authority, which she absolutely did not. That's impersonation of legal enforcement. A criminal offense. I drafted a letter. Not just any letter. A cease and desist, backed by statutes from both the HOA governing laws and state nonprofit code. I quoted everything from the bylaws she'd ignored to the legal consequences of false enforcement. I made sure it was clean, formal, and direct. But I didn't send it right away. I wanted her to make one more mistake, and she did. That Friday, a private security truck rolled into the neighborhood. Not police. Not sheriff's deputies. Just rent-a-cops with Karen-branded clipboards. I watched from my porch as they installed 2 new security cameras, one aimed directly at my driveway and another pointed at Raj's porch. No notice. No vote. No public meeting. I got it all on video. Then, as if scripted by fate itself, one of the security guys broke a section of the shared wooden gate that separates the community green space from the sidewalk. He just snapped the latch like it was nothing and kept going. I had the footage, the sound, the timestamp, everything. It was the final nail in Karen's cardboard coffin. That night, I called a few of my fellow residents and told them it was time. We'd let Karen play queen for long enough. She wanted to act like she ran the neighborhood? Fine. She could answer to someone who actually does. And the best part? She still had no clue who she was messing with. She thought I was just another homeowner with a truck and an attitude problem. She hadn't yet figured out that I had something more dangerous than power. I had patience, paperwork, and the law on my side. The real game was about to begin. It started with whispers and eye rolls, the kind you trade with neighbors in passing when something ridiculous happens. Like when Karen left laminated HOA warnings on windshields during a thunderstorm. But after what she tried with me and then with Raj and Mr. Delaney, those quiet sighs of annoyance turned into full-blown mutiny. People had finally had enough of the Queen's reign. And while she strutted around like she had the neighborhood under her thumb, she didn't realize the very foundation of her little empire was already cracking beneath her. One of the first to quietly flip was Sharon from across the street. She worked nights as an ER nurse and came home exhausted every morning, only to find Karen's friendly reminder slips tucked in her mailbox. Her crime? Leaving her porch light on during the day. Sharon had ignored it for weeks, until Karen posted a warning about Sharon's habitual non-compliance on the community Facebook group, tagging her and calling her a safety liability. That was the final straw. Sharon showed up at my place the next afternoon with a stack of papers and a furious glare. Turns out she'd been documenting every interaction, too. We added it to the file. By this point, I had more than enough evidence to take formal action, but I didn't want to act alone. I knew that if I filed a complaint as the sheriff, the story could easily turn into a battle of power versus homeowner. No, I needed this to come from the people. From the very folks Karen pretended to speak for. So, I made some calls. We organized a casual meetup at the local park under the guise of a neighborhood cleanup. Nothing suspicious. Just a few dozen residents talking with trash grabbers and bottled water. But what we really did that day was organize. People brought receipts, old emails, photos of Karen's notices, and even videos. Raj played a clip from his security camera where Karen stood on his lawn measuring the distance between his flower pots with a tape measure. No one could believe it was real until they saw it with their own eyes. While we gathered evidence and support, Karen was busy setting herself on fire without realizing it. That week, she sent out a mass email to the HOA mailing list announcing new fines and mandatory compliance check-ins. She demanded that all residents submit updated photos of their property for harmony assessments. She gave them 3 days' notice. People were stunned. Some laughed. A few were genuinely scared. But I reminded them what I'd already discovered. The HOA, as it was currently operating, had no legal teeth. Karen had no right to demand any of it. The real twist came when I received a tip from a teenage neighbor named Dylan. He was always skating around the block and had a knack for being in the right place at the wrong time. One afternoon, he overheard Karen bragging on a phone call in her backyard about how she'd made up half the rules to keep undesirable behavior out of the neighborhood. Dylan caught it all on video, from the bushes, no less. When I watched the clip and heard her say, "I don't care what the bylaws say. They'll obey or I'll fine them into submission," I nearly dropped my phone. It was the kind of blatant abuse of authority that made lawyers salivate. I compiled all the documentation and shared it with my contacts at the state HOA oversight office. They were intrigued, especially by the evidence of impersonation and the bogus lien threats. But the part that really caught their attention was the camera footage, both the ones installed without notice and the gate being broken by her hired security goons. That, they said, was a liability nightmare. Property damage, privacy violations, and misuse of funds. It was only a matter of time now. Despite all of this, Karen marched around like she was untouchable. One day, she parked in front of my house again and stood there, staring at the truck like it personally offended her. I waved at her. She didn't wave back. Instead, she pulled out a little notepad and scribbled something before slapping a new warning on my mailbox. Final violation notice. Truck must be removed within 48 hours or legal consequences will follow. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The next morning, I responded with a letter of my own, delivered via certified mail and witnessed by 2 neighbors. Inside was the cease and desist. Copies of the documents proving the HOA's expired non-profit registration, and a summary of the legal complaints being filed with both the city and state. I didn't threaten her. I didn't insult her. I simply laid out the facts. And then I ended the letter with a polite offer. Step down voluntarily or face a formal investigation into HOA misconduct, property harassment, and possible fraud. She didn't take it well. That night, Karen stormed down the street banging on doors, demanding residents sign a petition to remove hostile elements from the neighborhood, meaning me and anyone who dared to support me. The problem was, no one answered. Or rather, they answered, but they weren't signing anything. Most just closed the door. A few politely told her she was out of line. One elderly woman actually asked if she needed medical assistance. Karen left in a rage. By the weekend, the neighborhood was buzzing. People were no longer afraid. They were empowered. And Karen could feel it slipping. Her notices slowed down. Her patrols became less frequent. Even the little HOA dogs seemed less energetic, like they sensed the collapse of the empire. But the final blow hadn't come yet. That was still to come at the next official HOA meeting, the one Karen had called herself in a desperate attempt to reassert control. What she didn't realize was that we were all coming. Not just a few residents. All of us. And we were bringing paperwork, law books, and the cold hard truth with us. For the first time in a long while, the community felt united. Not in a kumbaya, bake sale kind of way. In a we've had enough of this nonsense way. The kind of unity that can only come from surviving tyranny in pastel workout gear and finally being ready to rise. The next chapter wasn't going to be about defense. It was about reclaiming what we'd let her hijack for far too long. Karen had made herself the star of the show. Now she was about to get the spotlight she never wanted. The meeting was set for 7 p.m. sharp on a Tuesday, inside the drab community clubhouse that hadn't seen this much activity since the annual bake sale that ended in a fistfight over banana bread. But tonight there wasn't a single folding chair left unclaimed. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years were now exchanging side eyes and whispered stories about Karen's greatest hits, from the infamous wind chime citation to the time she nearly fined a toddler for drawing chalk on the sidewalk. The air buzzed with anticipation, not the nervous kind, but the giddy, popcorn-worthy kind. Everyone could sense something big was coming. And Karen? She had no idea she was walking into her own political funeral. She strutted in like she always did, carrying her binder like it contained sacred scrolls and tapping a pen against her palm like a gavel. Her expression screamed overconfidence, lips tight and eyes darting around the room like a queen inspecting peasants. She cleared her throat and launched right into the agenda without even looking up. Item 1, she announced, is enforcement of new visual compliance standards. That was her latest invention. Rules designed entirely around what she found personally unattractive. She hadn't noticed yet that no one was nodding along. No one clapped. No one even looked interested. Except me. I sat front and center, arms crossed, papers stacked in a folder on my lap. She glanced at me and gave a smug little smile, like she believed she still had the upper hand. I gave her a nod and waited. Let her dig her own grave. And oh, did she ever! The first 20 minutes of the meeting were just her monologuing about new color restrictions, lawn ornament bans, and a proposal to prohibit porch seating unless chairs were pre-approved by the board. A few neighbors actually laughed aloud at that. Karen paused for a moment, confused, then forced a smile. "Let's maintain order, please," she said, voice tight. That's when I stood up. Slowly. Calmly. With the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. "Madam President," I said, deliberately using the title she insisted on in every HOA email, "before we move forward with any new business, we need to address a few legal issues regarding the current board." Her pen stopped tapping. The room hushed. I continued. "I have here," I said, holding up my folder, "evidence that the HOA's nonprofit status has not been renewed in over 2 years. According to state law, that means this board has no legal authority to enforce fines, approve architectural changes, or collect dues." Someone in the back gasped. Karen blinked rapidly. I flipped through the documents and kept going. "Furthermore, I have minutes from the last official board election, which was held 3 years ago, well beyond the term limit outlined in the HOA charter. That makes the current board, yourself included, invalid." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Karen tried to interject, but I raised a hand slightly, and she stopped. That alone told everyone everything they needed to know about who really held the power in the room. "As if that weren't enough," I said, flipping to another page, "we have multiple documented instances of unauthorized surveillance installations. Cameras pointed at private property without consent, installed using HOA funds without a community vote. And I've personally witnessed private contractors damaging shared property under the board's direction." Karen finally snapped. "This is outrageous. You're not a lawyer. You can't just show up and hijack an HOA meeting." I smiled. "No, I'm not a lawyer. I'm the county sheriff." That sentence landed like a grenade. Half the room gasped again. Someone actually said, "Wait, what?" out loud. A few clapped. Karen stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "I didn't want to play that card," I continued, "but given the severity of what's been happening here, I need everyone to understand how serious this is. Harassment, impersonation of legal authority, unauthorized fines. These are not just annoying. They're crimes." Karen's face turned from red to white to a shade of green the first didn't think humans were capable of. She opened her mouth again, but this time, she didn't get the chance to speak. Sharon from across the street stood up and said, "I second the motion to dissolve the current HOA board and call for an immediate re-election." And just like that, people started clapping. Loudly. Others stood up to show support. Karen tried shouting over them, but her voice was drowned out in the flood of applause and shouts of yes, and finally, the other two board members, both clearly just Karen's yes men, looked at each other, then quietly slid out the side door. Cowards. But smart cowards. It took a few minutes for order to return. When it did, I stepped aside and let Sharon take the floor. She, along with Raj and a few others, formed a temporary committee to oversee a fair election. We laid out guidelines, set dates, and encouraged every resident to vote. Open ballot, anonymous submissions, the whole 9 yards. This wasn't just about removing Karen. It was about restoring trust. Karen, meanwhile, sat down hard in one of the metal chairs near the corner, stunned and silent. She didn't say another word for the rest of the night. When the meeting ended, she left without even collecting her binder. Outside the clubhouse, people gathered in small groups, chatting and laughing like neighbors at a block party. There was relief in the air. Lightness. For the first time in a long while, people weren't afraid to sit on their porch with the wrong color cushion or let their kids ride bikes without getting harassed about helmet reflectors. It was more than a win. It was a cultural shift. As I walked to my truck, Raj jogged up beside me. Man, that was something else. You really brought the hammer down. I shook my head. All I did was give her the rope. She tied the knot herself. He laughed. Still, you're a legend now. Don't be surprised if you get nominated for HOA president. Hard pass, I said with a chuckle. I already run the county. Let someone else handle the flower pots. As I climbed into my truck, I looked back at the clubhouse one last time. The lights were still on, but the place felt different now. It no longer belonged to a tyrant in tennis shoes. It belonged to the people again. To the community. And as far as I was concerned, justice had been served, with a side of poetic timing. Karen's silence didn't last long. A few days after the meeting, she re-emerged, though no longer with the smug swagger she once paraded down the sidewalks. Her posture was different now, shoulders stiffer, movements more calculated. But she wasn't done. The meeting had wounded her pride, but it hadn't destroyed the one thing she couldn't live without: control. So, in a last-ditch attempt to claw her way back into relevance, Karen decided to sue. Not just me. The entire neighborhood committee that had voted her out. Her claim? Harassment, defamation, and unlawful removal from her elected position. She even hired a fly-by-night attorney she found online who advertised in the local classified section under discount divorces and pet custody consultations. That should have been a red flag for her, but Karen had never been known for wisdom, just persistence. When the official paperwork showed up on my doorstep, delivered via courier in an envelope so dramatically stamped "confidential," it looked like it came from a spy movie, I didn't even blink. I sat down with a cup of coffee, read it over once, and smiled. The suit was riddled with errors, spelling mistakes, and legal claims that barely made sense. She'd submitted screenshots of HOA meetings with red arrows drawn in MS Paint. One piece of evidence was a blurry photo of me parking my truck, which she had captioned, "Intimidating Presence." The judge wouldn't even need 10 minutes with this circus. Still, I did what any reasonable person would do. I called the county legal team and sent over the document. Within 24 hours, the case was scheduled for a preliminary hearing. And wouldn't you know it, the presiding judge was someone I'd worked with dozens of times over the years. Judge Warner was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the type who rolled his eyes at nonsense and had very little patience for entitled dramatics. The day of the hearing was surprisingly eventful. A small crowd from the neighborhood showed up, some wearing shirts that said, "Free the HOA" and "Karen doesn't rule here." Someone even made a badge that looked like mine but said, "Sheriff of Sanity." I didn't ask who made it, but I appreciated the sentiment. Karen showed up in a lavender pantsuit and dark sunglasses, acting like she was arriving for a red carpet appearance instead of a court date. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he'd borrowed his tie from a thrift store bin, stood beside her flipping through pages like he was seeing them for the first time. The judge didn't waste time. After listening to Karen's rambling, 20-minute monologue, which included accusations of mind control, neighborhood collusion, and, at one point, me running a shadow government, he finally leaned back in his chair and said, "Ma'am, this isn't even close to a legitimate case. If anything, the court could consider sanctioning you for wasting time and filing in bad faith." Karen's mouth dropped open, but he wasn't finished. He turned to me and said, "Sheriff Connors, would you like to countersue for harassment or damages?" I shook my head. "No, Your Honor. I think being exposed publicly for what she's done is more than enough." He nodded. "Very well. Case dismissed. With prejudice." It was over in less than 30 minutes. Karen stormed out of the courtroom without a word, sunglasses still on, clutching her binder like a life raft. Her lawyer looked relieved to be done, and practically sprinted to his car. The rest of us left the courthouse feeling lighter, vindicated, and, to be honest, a little amused. Karen had played her final card and lost. But the story didn't quite end there. About a week later, I got a phone call from a city official I knew. Apparently, during the review of Karen's filings and her past use of HOA funds, someone had flagged inconsistencies in her financial report. The state's HOA Regulation Board launched an inquiry. Turns out, Karen had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, printing flyers for her dog grooming business, reimbursing herself for gas on non-HOA errands, even writing checks to vendors that didn't exist. When the investigation concluded, the findings were forwarded to the district attorney's office. Karen was officially under investigation for embezzlement and tax fraud. I didn't gloat much, but I may have smiled a little when the news broke in the local paper. Her mugshot didn't have the smug expression we'd all come to recognize, it had something else entirely: defeat. The woman who once barked at neighbors for minor code violations was now facing charges that could land her in real legal trouble. The neighborhood threw a block party the following weekend. Not in celebration of her downfall, at least, not officially, but in recognition of a new chapter. One without paranoia. Without threats taped to doors. Without the constant fear that wind chimes or mismatched flower pots would earn you a citation. People grilled burgers, kids rode bikes without getting glared at, and someone brought a karaoke machine. Sharon sang a rousing version of "Hit the Road Jack," and no one needed clarification on who that was about. As for me, I sat in a lawn chair with a soda in hand, watching the neighborhood come back to life. Raj walked by with his dog and gave me a thumbs up. Mr. Delaney cracked a joke about how peaceful things were now that the HOA dogs weren't patrolling the sidewalk. Even Dylan, the teenager with the spy footage, stopped by to tell me his video was going viral online. "You're a meme now, Sheriff," he said, laughing. I could live with that. The temporary committee held official elections 2 weeks later, and while I was nominated unanimously, I politely declined. "I already have enough paperwork," I said, grinning. Instead, the role went to Sharon, who promised transparency, fairness, and absolutely no tape measures on private lawns. The new board agreed to toss all previous fines, remove all invasive cameras, and re-register the HOA properly with updated bylaws that required community votes on major decisions. Peace returned to our little corner of the world. Not just the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from knowing you stood up to a bully and won. Karen had tried everything to control us. She threatened, manipulated, lied, and bluffed. But in the end, she forgot one simple truth. Real power doesn't come from clipboards or petty rules. It comes from people who care enough to fight back and know how to do it right. And as for my truck, it's still parked in the same spot, clean and shiny. Sometimes I catch neighbors stopping to admire it. One even asked if they could take a picture next to it, saying it felt like a symbol now. I told them sure, just don't block the mailbox. You never know who might be watching.